sent the little request. Oh, I've sent the little request to be able to share my screen. I can see the share button, but it wouldn't let me just share. It said I had to send a request. So let me see. Oh, okay, I've got it. Okay, I'm not going to share quite yet. I just want to say thank you again for having me. Like Vanessa said, my name is Tanya Miller Witzel. I know I've met many of you. I work with the Welcome the Children project. One of our projects over the years has been ABICE, which now stands for Arkansas-based Interpreter Credential in Education. I just want to say off the like right at the start that our project is kind of in transition mode this year. So if there are questions that you ask and I say I need to get back to you, that's why probably is that some things are shifting a little bit in our project. So I just want to make sure to get you the best answers possible. I've invited Jessica Sanchez here. Wave to, Jessica is one of our ABICE credentialed interpreters, and she's worked with us over the years to help provide training. Have any of you attended her 3-hour training on collaborating with interpreters by any chance? Okay. So that was a really in-depth 3-hour training. What we are giving you today is a 1 hour. We'll hit on all the main topics. But if you have any questions, one of the beauties of this is that I work at Partners, so I'm easy to reach, easy to find. Feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. And if I don't know the answer, I have a whole committee and lots of great collaborators that I can always touch base with. One other thing I want to share about Jessica is she runs her own business. She's actively an interpreter. She does why don't I just let you, Jessica, if you just want to give a quick introduction of yourself, just so that they understand your perspective.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Sanchez, and I am the owner of NWA Bilingual Solutions. I interpret and I translate. I love interpreting. I specialize in special education. I do some medical and court interpreting as well. My the my biggest advice to everyone is make sure that however you're conducting your meetings, we always have the student in mind and the parent to make informed choices. I think that is, as an interpreter, the biggest thing for me is to know that I am not the one communicating. I am not the one making the decisions. I'm just being the bridge of information. So I want to make sure that as an interpreter, I do not take the autonomy of taking the decisions from the parents. That is very important. So I am happy to be here and be with Tanya. Part of what I do as well is advocating for language access in my community, what opportunities are there to inform families of what their rights are regarding language access, and also how to receive those services within their community. So if you have any questions regarding that, I am happy to answer questions as well and to partner with you to really provide that language access within your organizations. So thank you for having us.
Hi, everyone. Can you see, I'm having, my computer has just recently been updated and everything looks a little different. Is the slide that you're looking at the one that says about partners, or does it say let's talk?
Let's talk.
Oh, good. Okay, good. I've got this other screen. It's kind of going rogue. I'm just going to let it do what it's doing. I just want to be sure that we're on the same page. Okay. So we're calling today's session Let's Talk Collaborating to Improve Family Connections. You heard Jessica use the word language access. There's lots of ways to describe it, but what we're talking about is supporting families in understanding what's going on with their children, ultimately to support and benefit the children. So I'm gonna jump right to this one. Here are the main things we're going to talk about are the difference between an interpreter and a translator. Can y'all see this slide now too?
Yes, but just so you know, it's not in slideshow mode. It's
Okay.
just in your editing mode.
That's what I was struggling with. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, here, resume. Did that do anything?
No.
Okay. I apologize for the technical issues. Let me try one more time. I had it in slideshow mode and it didn't cooperate. So let me try this one more time. If I can. Well, we may have to leave it in edit if I can't get it to cooperate. Let me try this. Is that better? Is that more like a slideshow?
Ah, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you again for your patience. Okay. Now I just have to make sure I'm advancing in the right place. So does this say let's talk? Okay. Okay, great. Let me go back. I wanted to give, goodness. Okay. Is it now on the slide that says this session will address? Okay.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. We use Zoom all the time. I'm not quite sure why it's just acting up today. If I'm looking over here, it's just because that's where I've got you all. And I'll be honest, I prefer to train in person. I'm stronger. I just prefer in person, but I understand that we have to work with technology sometimes. So jumping back in, the four main things we're going to look at today are the difference between an interpreter and a translator. 2, the importance of using appropriately trained adult interpreters. 3, the 3 steps to an interpreted meeting, and a brief overview of the modes of interpretation and interpreter codes of ethics. And we'll be talking about other stuff too, but those are the main points I want to make sure that we address. So with a show of hands, have you participated in an interpreted meeting before? Okay, I see a few. Okay. Have any of you ever been asked to interpret before? I'm seeing shaking heads. Okay. I'm not able to see everyone, but it looks like a no. Okay. It's helpful for me to, just to know a little bit about the experience that you've had. And I just want to share, so long ago before I worked at Partners, and actually some of my time overlapped with when I worked at Partners. I worked for several different early childhood programs, and I was asked to do the work of an interpreter. And our project was so new at it that we were just kind of making the rules as we went. And there wasn't a lot available in the way of training, which is actually how I got involved in Welcome the Children. I was trying to understand how to better serve my community. And so we were just doing the best we could. And what we found over the years of providing training to interpreters in our state is that a lot of schools and communities are still in that phase of doing the best they can, learning as they go. And our work through Welcome Children has always been to try to elevate the role of interpreters and to call them interpreters. For a long time, people were not being called interpreters in the educational setting. And actually, ABICE was the first, as far as we know, we were the first state to standardize and create a credential for our state. Other states have come on board now and they're creating their own, but we were the first state to try to do that and have that recognized through the Arkansas Department of Ed. So it's something we've worked really hard on over the years. And something that it means a lot to us, again, to elevate the role, view interpreters as a profession. And to use that term was one of the first steps, because a lot of times it was kind of like, well, let's just pull Miss So-and-so from down the hall and she can help us with this, or let's pull this child and we're going to talk about why that model is not best practice. So first of all, let's talk about the terminology. An interpreter is a professional who interprets spoken or sign language. So from one language to another, spoken or sign language. Translator is in the written format. You'll often hear people interchange those two things. And in some other languages, there's only one word, or the word that's used kind of sounds like one or the other. So it can be confusing, even for the person doing the interpreting. It can be confusing, or it can be a new concept because, like I said, in some languages there isn't a word for both things. But in our aim to elevate the role, support the people doing this work, we think it's important to use the right terminology when we can. Um, so again, interpreter is the spoken or sign language, and translation or translator is the written. And another reason why it is so important to think of those as two separate things is because somebody might be very comfortable being an interpreter, very comfortable with the spoken language, but not be comfortable with the written language. Or it could be in the opposite direction. I don't know how many of you speak or write in another language, but it's very common to feel more comfortable doing one over the other. And some people may, especially if they, for example, grew up in the United States, they might be very comfortable with their spoken home language, but never have had an opportunity to learn the written form. I'd say my mom falls in that category. So I'm very familiar. I understand how that can be. So I just want to caution you not to assume that your interpreter is also really comfortable with written format. And that, and vice versa. The other thing is an interpreter, beyond the language skills, an interpreter has to be able to think on their feet and remain calm, cool, calm, collected, and like Jessica said, neutral. A translator has time to pull out all their dictionaries, or these days pull out all the computer apps and dig into what the word really means. Interpreters, we do encourage interpreters to bring to bring guides and resources with them, but they have to think on their feet. It has to be a much quicker thing. So, and they have to kind of be more people, like interacting with people, than a translator, could be hidden away by themselves and still be a really great translator. So you're really looking for kind of two different skill sets. Okay, why is this information important? As we all know, the legislative landscape is shifting slightly, and there are executive orders that affect some of this stuff, but Title V of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still in place, and the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, is also still in place. And I've got some wording here that I will let you read for yourselves, but it does provide us with guidance about qualified interpreters. It is important, especially if a child, for example, is receiving an IEP, things like that, is very important for the parents to receive that information in a way that they can understand. I encourage you, if you're interested and curious about this, to do your own research as well, and make sure that you feel comfortable with the way things are being done. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us about that. Any questions right now? I know I'm kind of zipping through this. Any questions right now?
Tanya, what I just thought, when this says qualified interpreters, I mean, like, what does that mean? Because I know that a lot of our schools are just pulling whoever they can from down the hallway, or they get volunteers to interpret, for these meetings. I'm just curious with
That's
that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of guidance. We had some guidance, but that was replaced with a new executive, or it was provided through an executive order, which has been replaced with a new executive order that kind of went a different direction. So, um, but that's the number one. Yeah, that's the wiggle room. I'm just going to be honest. The wiggle room is that qualified is not clearly defined. But I would generally say pulling a teacher out of the middle of their classroom while they're teaching a class is if they haven't received, some teachers have received ABICE or other interpreter credentials, so maybe they are qualified. Generally, the standard is a 40-hour, just nationwide, the standard for interpreting is at least a 40-hour training. But that's not in the law. Jessica, do you want to add? I know Jessica's done a lot of research on this for us and probably has a lot. I don't know if you have anything quick you want to share about this.
Yeah, there has to be some kind of formal training for it to be a qualified interpreter. Again, the guidance that we previously have has been removed. And right now we have Title VI where there's no discrimination, and the person that is providing interpreting services has to have some kind of training on interpreting, not bilingual staff. And that's where we want to make sure that we differentiate between qualified, someone that has received some sort of training to provide language services, versus someone that is just bilingual. So someone that is bilingual will have an understanding of both languages for their own understanding. They know what they're going to say, right? Someone that is interpreting has to have an understanding of what someone else is saying, be able to grasp that understanding to then convey it. So they have to be exposed to new vocabulary, to different vocabulary, and continue the training, because we know that language is alive and forever changing. So an interpreter is never done. What is really important and where you can differentiate between a qualified interpreter and bilingual staff is any training that an interpreter receives, they receive a code of ethics. They have to follow a code of ethics. They have to know they have to know that they cannot insert their 2 cents. So there has to be a code of ethics for them to be qualified. If they are adding their 2 cents, summarizing information, if you are summarizing information, that is not something that an interpreter does. Again, if you say, I'm having a hot flash, the interpreter is going to say, I'm having a hot flash. So whatever you don't want said in front of or conveyed to the other party, do not say it, because the trained interpreter or qualified interpreter will provide that. So there has to be a code of ethics there. So you can ask whomever if you're going through the process of hiring someone, ask about the code of ethics. That will give you your answer right away if this person qualified or not.
Thank you, Jessica. I don't know if we shared this, but Jessica's also been very involved with the national organization. They shortened their name to NATISL, and we'll be sharing their links to their information at the end of this training, and it's also on our website. But they have tons and tons of free information, and I encourage you to explore that. It has codes of ethics, resources for families, resources for therapists, community members, etc. So, and so when Jessica shares her wisdom like she just did, I feel really comfortable that she is reflecting kind of the highest standard, because she's been so involved on a national level and kind of sees what's going on in other states as well. So I will say we're going to talk a little bit about this as well, but I know that the work that you all do kind of bridges a couple different settings, and like you do home visits, you're doing some community-based work and in schools. So there are different slightly different guidelines for interpreters in different fields. The educational field tends to have is a little less strict, maybe you could say, than like a medical interpreter or a court interpreter. They have very strict guidelines, but they all would have a code of ethics, and the code of ethics actually are fairly similar throughout. But yeah, so my background is more specifically educational settings. And we'll keep talking about that, but I just wanted to mention that too. Any questions?
And sorry to interrupt, Tanya, but I forgot to mention this, and this is something that is very important for anyone interpreting. A really important thing is that they have to be proficient in both languages. So that measure has to take place. They have to be able to provide proof of their proficiency in both languages. As Tanya had mentioned earlier, sometimes one language is stronger than the other, and sometimes it's receptive. Maybe receptively they really understand a lot, but expressively they don't fully have the vocabulary. So being proficient, being trained, and that those are like really, really important things that reflect a qualified interpreter.
Thank you, Jessica. And ABICE and other credentials and trainings, that would be something to look for. So ABICE does require, or has in the past required, a fluency assessment, and other credentials and trainings do as well as part of that training process. So that's something to consider. It's also something, it's some hiring entities would on their own require a prospective interpreter to go through the process of a fluency assessment. So that's an option sometimes as well. So we've moved on to this slide. And I just wanted to mention too, so today, as we all know, is September 15th, 2025. I know that this is being recorded, so I just want to make sure that I clarify that I'm answering to the best of my ability, and Jessica's answering to the best of her ability as of right now. As I mentioned at the beginning, our training is, and our project is a target, or a little bit, we're in a little bit of time of flux and things are shifting. So I just want to mention that in case anyone is watching this from the future, it's possible that the answers would be different to some of these questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask or add? Okay. So as you see on this slide, our number one concern really as a project has always been using children, using students as interpreters. Anyone under 18 should not be used as an interpreter. And like we said, ideally your individuals over 18 are trained, but it is a violation to be using children as an interpreter. And there are so many ramifications. We could probably talk for a couple hours about all of the trickle down ramifications of why we should not be using children as interpreters. But I will share one story with you. We had actually someone attend our training in the past and share that while she was gone, her school district did not come up with a plan B. So that is something I would recommend. Always have a plan B. So if your interpreter is at a training or on a trip or gets sick, that you have some option that doesn't require using a student. So this school, there was a child who had been bitten. They called in a student, I think he was in maybe fourth grade, to call the parent. And the word that he used in Spanish, the way he pronounced it, it sounded like he said, instead of saying your child has been bitten, he said your child has died. And the mom, as you can imagine, immediately started screaming. The child got freaked out. He hung up. And it took a while for the school to uncover what had happened and fix that situation. But as you can tell, like what the school was thinking was just a routine quick call turned out to be something major. So that's another, like I said, there's so many things we could talk about just with that one story, but if you're not really familiar with the other language, it's hard to know when two words might sound similar or when there might be another meaning or so that's part of why it's so important to have a trained adult interpreter. Think about the trauma that now that child has been through, the parent, the any connections and relationships that you've built you've now kind of gone backwards on that. Also, I have a lot of friends who grew up being the family interpreter, and it puts the whole family dynamic upside down. A lot of times the children start having to be the family representative, learning words for banking or gynecology, all kinds of stuff. And so we don't, as educators, people working in the education field, we want to support children. So we don't want to put them in those inappropriate positions. We've heard of students being asked to interpret during their own parent-teacher conferences, and they've told their parents that F means fantastic, and so or fabulous, and so the parents like, I don't understand why why I've been called to another meeting. He's got all F's. He's fantastic, So it's just not an accurate, reliable, appropriate thing to be doing. Any questions about that? Okay. And then truly using an untrained interpreter, requiring families to provide their own, not appropriate, and having consent forms and information that the parent does not understand is also not appropriate. There's no way for them to truly give consent if they do not understand what the information is. And Jessica? Did you want to add?
Um, my computer's going crazy, but since there is a pause too, I didn't even meant to send those reactions.
Oh, okay.
But something really important too here is that I know that there has been a lot of new changes. English is the official language now, but this does not change Title VI. So these can still continue to be civil rights violations. So it's really important that we're going to have parents complete documents in another language that is not their home language. Maybe the document is not ready, it has not been translated, then we have to have an interpreter give that rendition. We want to make sure that they are making informed choices. Also, IEPs, IFSPs, any plans that the parents is requesting a translation, timely manner. There has been families that they had their annual review and now they're already working on their next annual review. It's been probably 14 months since the initial one, and they still have not received a translation from the first one. So how are they going to be working in the goal with how are they going to be working in those goals in unison with the school team if they don't have that documentation in their own language? So keeping those things in mind are going to really help because we want to provide the services in time. Now, I know that we talk about maybe a violation of civil rights is using someone that is not trained, or maybe a software, right? There's all these different apps and just popping getting a phone and turning on a random app and assuming that it interpreted everything that we said. It wouldn't be appropriate. There's so many nuances in education and special education, just culturally, that we need a human to interpret what is going on. And those are all my 2 cents for now. Thank you, Tanya.
Sure, thank you. Just to add on to what she was saying, yes, I would always recommend having a human involved, even for written translations. We've had people tell us that, like, the word accommodation, which is a word we use a lot in our field, the robots often translate it as like a hotel accommodation. We've also had situations where school was having like spirit night, which meant like wear your school, colors and things like that. But it translated it like spirit, like alcohol, alcohol spirits, wine and spirits. And so the families were coming expecting a very different type of event. Also, spirits, as you know, could be translated as like, otherworldly spirits. So we just want to make sure, because the robots aren't, and computer systems and things like that aren't going to understand those nuances and that context. So it really is important to have a human review it, even if you use that as your starting point. And yes, the technology is getting better for some languages, but it's still not perfect. And my colleagues, my Marshallese colleagues, say that things like Google Translate, I think maybe even Chat GPT will say that they can translate into Marshallese. They have like a drop down option sometimes, but that it is gobbledygook, for lack of another term. It's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. Or they've actually had examples of it being very offensive. There are some really major standardized forms floating out there in Marshallese that are offending the families. Instead of saying like something about checking to see if you are qualified, it says a derogatory term and basically offends the families for trying to sign up. So we just want to be really, really careful in all languages that that these things are being reviewed by humans who can understand what's being said. Another thing that again, this topic is something that Jessica and I could talk about, and often do talk about, for you know, a week. So so I'm trying to keep it short here. But I also would just like to mention, since Spanish is our like number one language in our state, probably after English, that you would be using an interpreter for, there are a lot of different variations. So if someone is from Mexico versus Spain versus Guatemala, the language and the word usage is sometimes different. So like some of the words I grew up hearing that were very normal child words for families to use are swear words for other countries. So that's another thing. And if you're working with an interpreter, a lot of times the interpreter will say, I'm from this country, to the family. And they may tell you this too, I'm from this country. So if there's a word I'm using that doesn't make sense to you, let me know. We've done the word for straw and the word for peach in Spanish. There's like 4 or 5 different words, just depending on the region that people are from. So, um, that's something to know about. I know, like, when we used to have to translate stuff at Head Start, we had a lot of questionnaires about food. We literally would put like this word and this word and this word so that we were covering all the versions of peach and families knew what we were talking about. Um, so now we're looking at the 3 steps. So the first step is prepare. Well, let me just review that. So it's prepare, engage, and then debrief and reflect. I think, those are pretty obvious words, but prepare would be all this kind of the concepts we've just been talking about is like meeting your interpreter ahead of time, letting your interpreter know what the topic is that you're going to be discussing. If there are any written documents you can possibly share with the person ahead of time, share with the person ahead of time so that they can be fully prepared. There may be a lot of research they need to do to make sure they're up to speed with terminology. Say you're talking about like fine motor skills, large motor skills, or gross motor skills, things like that. They may have to make sure they know how the right terminology to talk about those concepts. So that's all in the prepare. And I would say start that as early as possible. If you do it same day, you're going to have a less prepared interpreter. I'm not saying they can't jump in and do it, especially if there's someone who does this work all the time, but it's much better to prepare well in advance, ideally at least a week or so. I will have Jessica jump in. She may have some other ideas about some of this too. But that's kind of the prepare piece.
You want to,
Jessica?
yeah, you want to make sure that by notifying the interpreter with time, they can also block enough time for you. We want to make sure that they are aware what kind of interpretation is going to be needed. So there's different types of interpretation. Maybe it's going to be consecutive, where there's a pause every 2 to 3 sentences, which means that if you initially schedule this meeting for 30 minutes, guess what? It's 1 hour now because everything's being repeated. Or maybe you only have a short amount of time. This is a meeting that you wanted simultaneous, but maybe that interpreter has never done simultaneous interpreting. So we want to make sure that they are aware what type of meeting, what type of interpreting is going to be needing for them to have enough time. And also, we do recommend for if it's going to be a long meeting, because we know sometimes it happens, the needs of the child are great. And sometimes you have to book 2 meetings or 3 meetings, continuum, but have an interpreter. It's not a computer, and they reach a point where they start slurring their words and they're in the message and there's an impact to the message. So for simultaneous interpretation, that is 1 hour. Consecutive is an hour and a half. Anything over that, usually is going to need a partner interpreter so they can take turns. And make sure that they maintain the fidelity of the message. So preparing really, it can mean so many things, but the interpreter want to make sure that they have enough time for you. They book enough time. If you want the interpreter to be in the meeting, and guess what? This is a referral meeting. Now, after the meeting, you want the interpreter to stay and fill out forms with parent. Let the interpreter know. Send those forms ahead of time so that again they can identify vocabulary that is unknown or find the equivalent already in Spanish. No need to recreate the wheel if if that is the case. If there is anything that is happening with evaluating a child, we want to make sure that the interpreter knows the protocols for that test. Maybe they cannot say, "Good job, you got it right." That would invalidate the test. So we want to make sure that they are aware what are the protocols. You cannot say anything, no feedback. So that is a valid test, and we don't have children that are underqualifying or overqualifying based on bad interpretation.
Mhm. And
Back to
oh,
I was
sorry.
gonna say back to you.
Oh, um, to add to that, some of those screens or tools that you're using, assessment tools, have a version in different languages, and I would encourage you to share that with your interpreter too, because some of the guidance like for example, the dial 4 is used a lot in state in our early childhood world. Because of the types of stuff it's looking for, it's not a direct translation in Spanish. It's fully normed in Spanish with different questions. It's not a direct translation of the English version because the languages are set up differently. So I would encourage you when possible to see if there's a version in the target language. There might not be, but if there is, to find that and to provide that to the interpreter. And again, some of those are better done than others, but it's still a very important resource for the interpreter to have. Also, it'll often have like that list, like I was just talking about, of appropriate words or things for the child to say back as a response, and that can be very helpful too for the interpreter. So then any questions? Okay. Um, so then in Engage, let's say this is a parent-teacher conference type situation. I know some of what you do is in homes, so that may be a little bit different, but if you're the person who's got the space, if it's on your home turf and you have some control over how the space is set up, I would encourage you to be familiar enough with the family to know who all will be there. A lot of our families um, live with their extended family and several family members are raising this child. So if it fits with your confidentiality policies, I would encourage, if grandma's equally involved in raising the child, let grandma be in the room. Also, you may have baby brother, baby sister also in the room. So, ideally a room that can handle and enough chairs to handle the whole family if that meets your confidentiality requirements. When I worked at Head Start, I lucked into a little waiting room that had a little table, chairs, and toys. And everyone eventually learned that that's where I was going to have meetings with families because they could be comfortable. They felt welcome. They didn't feel, like, well, I was only expecting one parent, and so that goes a long way too, sending a message of welcoming to families. Um, and then the actual setup is really important. We and Jessica hinted at this at the beginning, but we want the conversation to be happening between you all. I often the provider, the educator, the therapist, the professional, and the family. The interpreter should be taking kind of a backseat to the situation. We call them the conduit. They're the conduit of information, but the family and the interpreter should be the ones having the main conversation. So we sometimes suggest kind of a triangular seating situation where the interpreter is here and the parents and the um, educator, provider, therapist person is over here. Sometimes you'll see guidance that says that the eye contact should be happening between the parent and the educator, provider person. I would caution always expecting eye contact. In a lot of communities, maintaining eye contact is considered very disrespectful and rude for the parents, but also sometimes the children. So towards you. So I found that quite a bit. Again, when I was working at Head Start, a lot of the dads in particular would kind of look past my shoulder versus like straight in the eyes, and it can be a sign of respect. So don't I know we're all kind of trained to look at body language, but I don't want you to misunderstand that. So we are encouraging the conversation to happen between you, but it may not involve a ton of direct eye contact. There is some guidance, especially in medical settings and some other settings. Some educational trainings will recommend this, that the interpreter hovers behind the parent, but a lot of parents find that very uncomfortable. The idea there would be, again, to promote communication between those two parties, but a lot of times parents are not comfortable with that. So we always have suggested a lot of educational interpreting standards of practice will encourage the interpreter to do what's comfortable for the family and not force that. But that is something you'll see in some trainings. And then a really important, so while you're engaging, the interpreter should do some form of what's called a pre-session, and I've got that down on there. pre-session is their chance to set the ground rules. Sometimes the educator or the provider takes on that role, but of introducing everyone. But one of the signs of a trained interpreter is that they will introduce themselves and do a brief pre-session in both languages. That it'll be like, oh, I should have Jessica do it because she's really quick with hers. I'll just let her do it and then we can debrief about what that is if we need to. Do you want to? I'm putting you on the spot, Jessica, but I saw
Yep.
you unmute, so.
And I'm going to skip the Spanish part. I'm just going to, so this is how it goes. This is a bilingual message and it will be repeated in English. Este es un mensaje bilingüe y será repetido en inglés. I speak Spanish. Now I'm going to skip to my English part. My name is Jessica. I will be today's interpreter. I will be interpreting everything that I hear without adding or omitting information. I will be interpreting in a consecutive mode. So I ask of all participants to please pause after every 2 to 3 sentences to maintain a clear interpretation. For those who can see me on screen, I'll be raising my hand if I need to clarify a term or concept that I have not understood or if I need a pause. I will maintain all this information confidential and I will speak in first person. We may begin. Podemos comenzar.
Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Mhm.
So the first person piece is like she gave the example earlier, if someone says an I statement like, I am the teacher, the interpreter will say, I am the teacher. So it's really important to clarify that that you're using first person, because again, people who maybe are new to a trained interpreter may be used to the person saying, and she says this and she says that, and they get confused about who the message is actually coming from. Are there any questions? I just realized I can't see everyone's screen. Any questions at this point? Okay. So, and then confidentiality, excuse me, is obviously of utmost importance. And so that is another thing to make sure you talk to the interpreter about in advance. And just to maintain and clarify throughout as necessary. I know sometimes in casual settings like home visits and things like that, it can be easy for people to forget that piece. So it's really important. But it also means that if you've had this agreement with your interpreter about confidentiality, then you should be allowed to then debrief with them after the fact and talk about what's happened in that meeting. And they should have the permissions to do that. And that can be super important. So the debrief and reflect after the encounter can be things like, I'll just give an example. I once interpreted for a meeting with a family and a nutritionist, and it was her first time in an interpreted meeting. She was very uncomfortable, very flustered with it. And at the end, she just kind of jumped up and left. And it was in Spanish. For a lot of people in Spanish speaking community, especially back then, it's kind of more formalized. And so you would have a formal greeting and a formal taking of leave or saying goodbye. And so the fact that she jumped up and left really struck them, and they thought she was angry with them, and they were confused about if they had said something wrong. And so we had to again do a little mending to rebuild those connections in that bridge. But there are a lot of times are nonverbals that are hard to pick up on, and that we can kind of lean on our interpreters to help with that. My Marshallese colleagues have taught me, I still don't really understand it, but they do a lot of signals with eyes that kind of do like an eyebrow raise and eyes looking a certain direction. And it can be a way of saying yes, like just to raise your eyebrows. So there may be nonverbals happening that that we need our interpreters to help us with. And then I also just want to share, because this can be tricky. We're asking a lot of our interpreters, but especially if it's ever virtual, to pick up on all this stuff. But we don't want to assume that people who are requiring an interpreted interaction have like a low level of education or are new to these topics. You know, we've had situations where interpreters thought, gosh, this person's not asking any questions. I guess I need to like lower, we call it like lowering our register, like making it more simplified language. And then it turned out at the very end that the reason the parent did not have any questions is because they had like a PhD level education degree. And so they were like, I have no questions because I know all this stuff. And then, but I will say in back again, it was a long time ago, but back when I worked at Head Start, we did have to survey the highest level of education of our families. And at the time, fifth grade was, for a lot of our families, was the highest. And that was because in the areas where they were from, you had to pay to go to a city, like from a rural area, in order to have any education beyond fifth grade. And we had some parents that had third grade. So I don't want anyone to leave this training thinking that I'm again saying to make any assumptions, but we do want to be respectful and supportive of families, and so assuming that everyone can read in Spanish, if that's their language, is not, I wouldn't make assumptions, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And for some of our families, Spanish is not their first language. Spanish may be their second language. They may speak, sometimes people call it a dialect, but it's really an indigenous language. It's a whole different language. And so Spanish may be their second language. And then for the kiddos, a lot of times English is their third language. So there's often a lot more going on with our families than you might guess. But yeah, some parents, same in English, may need some support in reading written documents, especially really complicated ones. Okay, any questions? Okay. And now we're at 2:15. Am I right? Our time goes till 2:30?
Yes.
Okay, we're getting close to wrapping up, and then we'll have the time for Q&A. But I just wanted to check my time. Okay, Jessica touched on this, but there are different modes of interpretation. And one reason why it's important to know a little bit about these is that when you're requesting an interpreter, they might ask what kind you need. And I'll be sharing a little bit about our database later. And that will also, there's a place to request, which kind of interpretation you need. So it's important to know the difference. Those of you who've been in interpreted meetings, how many of you have been in consecutive? That's where you say something, then the interpreter says it. And okay, that's probably the most common in our settings. And like Jessica said, basically everything's being said at least twice. So you have to leave time for that, for double. Also, this is not just, well, this is something that can happen in consecutive. I just want to, while I'm thinking about it, mention that the way we always talk about it with interpreters too, is that like you all here, the educators or therapists or providers are the owners of the information. The interpreter is not the owner of the information. So if there is a question and a clarification that needs to happen, we always encourage interpreters to go back to the owner of the information rather than trying to clarify it on their own. So they might say, well, can you explain what gross motor means? It doesn't necessarily mean that the interpreter doesn't know what it means. It means that they're trying to give you a chance to explain it in a way that the family can understand, and then they can interpret that. Does that make sense? So you may see that sometimes, that clarification. I think all of us it's something we do in our field. We often use acronyms. We often use terms that families don't understand because we're so used to them, we kind of forget. So we're trying to, I would encourage you to think about the wording that you're using, and do it as clear as possible, and just thinking about how someone may have to then explain it. My Marshallese colleagues, I think I've shared this, some partners meetings, but I work on another project specifically with the Marshallese community. Let me back up and say we have a lot of language groups in Arkansas. I'm mostly talking about those two because they're the most populous, but we have Karen, Swahili, Russian, French, Portuguese, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of language groups in our state. But what I was going to say is, in some languages, and this is true for Marshallese, there's not a word-to-word translation or interpretation. So like the word disability, we had to work over several years to kind of come up with a way that they could describe it that was respectful and appropriate, because a lot of the words that were being used were derogatory. And so that's another thing to know, like you may use a word. The other thing you might hear is they might use basically the English word. So that's okay. That is, in some languages, that's the word that they're using now. It's kind of like how proper nouns, you don't really translate them usually. Is some words, especially like internet, social media type words, a lot of times it's the same word just said maybe with a slightly different like intonation or accent. So it's not necessarily a sign that the person doesn't know the word. I would say if they're doing a lot of English, then that would be a red flag to me. But there are a few words here and there that may be what they have had to lean on. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. So then simultaneous, this is, like it says, often used in large groups or assemblies. Think like town hall meetings, PTSA meetings. I mean, also you may see it's what's used in the UN, some churches. A lot of times there's a device where, oh, I should have had, well, in person, a lot of times Jessica will bring her equipment and show how it works. So that's really cool. But basically, the families are given a headset and they have like a channel where they can switch to the language group that they need. And there are school districts in our state that have this equipment. So if you're doing a large group meeting, especially if there's a lot of English speakers in the room and speakers of other languages, it can be helpful to have that so everyone can just sit where they want to sit and hear the language at the same time. Otherwise, sometimes people do it a technique where they're basically whispering in small groups, and that's can be very confusing and disruptive. But that's one version of simultaneous. It can also be like if you're in a heated IEP meeting and you start out consecutive and then people start talking over each other, the interpreter might have to just switch into simultaneous and start. Basically, it's not, obviously can't be truly simultaneous because they're not quite mind readers, but it's close. And that's a different skill set also than consecutive. You have to be able to listen and talk and switch languages all in your head all at the same time. So that is for most people, that's a kind of a higher level than consecutive. Some people find it easier. It just kind of depends on the person. And then sight translation should only be used occasionally and for really short texts. But that's like if I walk in the room and they say, here's this document, can you just read this to the parent in their language? I'm going to let Jessica jump in and give some details on the guidance there, but we usually say you should not be doing that for like full packets, full IEP packets, or full packets of anything. Maybe like a brief paragraph, because it's just, I mean, it would just be too much. It's too much to expect that all to be happening all in the moment. And if there is a big packet that needs to be switched into the other language, it should be translated either ahead of time or very quickly after would be best practice. Jessica?
So no more than one page for sure. So we have an IEP packet. Hey, why don't you read it to the parent? That's too much. We're not going to do that. Or just read the platform to the parent. That's not appropriate either. And whenever we have we request a side translation, we want to make sure we give the interpreter enough time to read it for themselves, to read it for understanding. We don't want a choppy side translation, pause every half of a sentence where the rendition will not make any sense, right? In this case, for me, Spanish, I'm waiting for that verb. So I have to wait. If I am, is the first time I see this document and I start right away, the structure of the sentence will not make any sense in Spanish. So I'm going to make sure you give your interpreter enough time to sight translate, to identify and know vocabulary, to be able to find that vocabulary or clarify information, then provide their rendition. This is a common document. I would recommend for translation of the document. If it's not, again, just have in mind that the interpreter will need time to sight translate. So avoid long, complex legal documents very short, just essential for a parent to maybe sign a document. Maybe it's like a notice of conference or a permission for a field trip. So we want to make sure the parent still has access to that information, right? Because they might need it. Maybe they did sign the notice, but everything's in English. The parent no shows because information was in English. So we want to make sure that even whenever we are providing site translation, that the parent does have that information that they're going to need to follow up and take action.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. I'm seeing my time. It says, 2:25. I've got three different times on on various devices here. So I'll go with the 2:25. So we're kind of pushing it time-wise. So I will continue, but I would just want to say, like I said before, please don't hesitate to reach out. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who does. So we don't have time to go through all the details of the Code of Ethics, but we also have this up on our website. This is just wanted you to see an example of, this is the Arkansas Code of Ethics. The NATISL one is linked here. It's slightly different, but very similar. One example I shared with someone was professionalism, you know, helping people know what is considered professional in your setting would be very helpful, because the way you have to dress. I've kind of lost my Zoom screen somewhere along the way, so I hope you all can still see what you need to see. But the way you address in a preschool setting may look very different than a court setting. We've heard examples of people going straight from court to early childhood and kind of scaring the children in their suits and stuff. And so it's helpful to give people some guidance about what's appropriate. And let's see, compensation. We want families to know that if you are providing this interpreter free of charge to them, that they don't think that they are expected to reimburse or pay the interpreter in any way. There are people who provide interpretation in the community. That's kind of, that's up to people to figure that out. But in your settings, that's an important thing for families to know, that they're not supposed to be paying the interpreter. The school should be, or the program, or however you've worked that out. And that compensation setup should be all set up and taken care of in advance. And there are different rates. Different languages will charge different rates. If it's a less commonly spoken language like Marshallese or Korean, they may charge more than Spanish. That's appropriate. That's considered appropriate and standard in the field. And then professional development, I will let Jessica jump in. I just want to say we should all be lifelong learners. Like Jessica said, language is a moving, living thing. And so, if it's an interpreter you're working with a lot, invite them to shadow you, even to not interpreted meetings. Invite them, and when appropriate, invite them to go to your conferences, invite them to learn the concept so that it's easier. They may not be able to, but I would say invite them, because the more they learn about the content, the easier and quicker it'll go for everyone involved. Jessica?
Regarding going back a little bit to compensation, it is very important to keep in mind the less diffuse, the more expensive the interpreter will be. Also, there is usually, when it's an independent contractor, there is a minimum fee, right? A deposit, however you call it. So it just has to, sometimes it's 1 hour minimum, 2 hour minimum, depending on the type of interpreting or the type of assignment that they have. And I wanted to go back even a little bit further to the previous slide when we're talking about the different types of interpreting, and Tanya mentioned something really important, having the owner of the information to clarify any point. So a lot of the times, especially whenever you have an in-house interpreter, they'll receive messages from different staff saying, can you call this parent and ask him so-and-so? without the owner of the information there. So then they end up triangulating a lot. Well, I call parent, but now I'm not the owner of the information. So even though I know the answer, I can't provide it. So I have to go back and forward. So it's important that either if you're not going to be present, have exactly what the interpreter has to say, and know that there's going to be triangulating, or being present is the most important thing. A lot of the times, different evaluators will provide different tools to the interpreter. Say, here's the rating scale. There's the parent. Goodbye. The evaluator should be present at all time with the interpreter to clarify, to ensure that the protocols are being followed, and that is a valid scale. So making sure the owner of the information is there always is very important. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all for your for being here and for your patience with us. We are at the 2:30 mark, and I apologize for not giving more time for questions. Does anyone have a quick question?
I have a question, Tanya. I don't know how quick it is, but
Okay.
so when you were kind of talking about the pre-session, and you were saying that, kind of establishing using first person, like, okay, but would there ever be a case where you don't use first person? I mean, wouldn't you kind of always do it that way? Because I know that sometimes I see people might say to the interpreter, "Oh, tell mom this." But wouldn't you always be just talking to the mom using first person instead? I mean,
Yes, yeah. And I just need to say, disregard whatever I just sent to you all. I was trying to send a link to our evaluation. I think I may just send it to Jackie to send to you because something got mixed up there in my head. Yes. Everyone should be speaking first person in those meetings. Yeah.
Okay, but you're just
Yeah.
saying you should say it to make it clear if it's the first time.
Right.
Okay.
So that's part of the interpreter's pre-session is they'll say, I'm speaking in first person because yeah, a lot of people are used to the interpreter saying, oh, and she said this and oh, she said that. And so they'll think that it just helps set those ground rules. But yeah, you as the educator, provider, therapist should use first person. The parent should, every player in the room should use first person. Mhm.
And that is, again, a big telltale between the trained interpreter, qualified interpreter versus a bilingual staff. Trained interpreter, that's kind of like one of the pillars of interpreting. You're told you have to interpret in first person. And when you have to clarify, the interpreter usually speaks in third person. The interpreter needs to clarify. The interpreter needs a repetition. So it makes it easier for the flow of the assignment. But yes, whenever you as someone that is a participant in this session, always speak directly to the parent. Always speak directly, and it takes a little bit. It takes a little. If you're not used to it, it's just going to take a little bit to get used to it. Get a rubber band, or a little sticky note that just that. Again, if this was an English speaker, would I be speaking directly? Yeah. Forget about the interpreter. The interpreter is supposed to be as invisible as possible, and just communicate directly because that's all the parent will mirror that as well. We want the engagement to happen with the educator, with the school staff, not with the interpreter, because what happens in a lot of times, the connection happens with the interpreter. The interpreter leaves to another facility. They feel like the families feel like they're lost. So we want to make sure that the families feel like they are engaging with educational staff.